All right, this is our plan for today. We've done our introductions. Stephen will be our primary guide as we go in and out of the agenda, and we'll do our opening prayer, but we hope to mine the expertise of the experts in the room to help us look at what's currently going on, the assets we have, and some next steps to look at it from where we sit as independent people and as part of a group. Our wisdom is more together than we are apart. Stephen, what would you like to add at this point?
I think simply to acknowledge this builds on the webinar we did a month ago. And a month ago, we had a couple of people we brought in as resource people. And we realized there was so much wisdom in the room, and that a big part of what draws us to Alum is the opportunity to build connections with each other. So we are thrilled and excited to see so many of you here today, and thanks for joining us. I want to say a couple of technical things and not too much because we want to jump into content. A couple of you I noticed were having trouble with microphones, and there could be a whole host of reasons for that, but let me just make a suggestion. If you move your mouse over where the pictures are, you'll see down in the bottom left corner, you'll see the microphone icon, and beside it is a little up arrow. It might be that you have more than one microphone installed on your computer and that you're connecting, or Zoom has connected to the wrong one. So if your microphone is connecting to the headset over on the other end of the desk, it might be why you're so soft. And that's something you might want to play with. The other thing that might be helpful to everybody, right now I'm sharing the PowerPoint, and you're probably seeing all the thumbnails right across the top of the screen because that's how it defaults. But you can change that so that the pictures are down the side. Move your mouse up to the top of the screen and click View Options. It won't change what anybody else sees, but it will change what you see. And if you go into side-by-side mode, then you can pick up with your mouse the line between the PowerPoint and the pictures and move it so that you can see more pictures. And it's kind of neat when we're in a round table like this to be able to see lots of different faces. So if you get bored, feel free to play around with it. You won't change what anybody else sees. We're going to spend a fair amount of our time today in small groups, but when we're in plenary like this with so many on the screen, it's kind of nice to see the faces. I was invited to open with prayer, and when I'm not doing this continuing education job, I also minister in a congregation. This is the candle that we've been burning every time we gather for worship in my congregation, which I'm leading right from here, just like I do everything else. I've turned into a basement troll and I never leave this room. So as we begin, take a moment to reflect on why you're here. Take a moment to reflect and give thanks for all of the breadth of experience that we have gathered into our meeting today. The different denominations, the different jobs that we bring, the different programs that we run, the variety and the people we have to learn from. And then let's invite God also into our conversations. Because we gather not just as colleagues, but we gather trusting in the light of Christ that strengthens us and inspires us and illumines our path. And so friends, let us pray. Loving God, thank you. Thank you for all who have gathered. Thank you for the technology that connects us. Thank you for the experience we bring and the things that we can learn even out of the crisis we're living through. Come be with us. Inspire our conversations. Help us to listen with grace and to speak with wisdom and to discover things that we didn't know before. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Stephen. So we're going to move into a dynamic series of discussions where Stephen will invite us to break into small groups based on what he's about to show us.
Oh, you mean I have to do this now? Okay, I can do that. We basically wanted to do a bit of a SWOT analysis today. I know that's a tool that many of us have used many times, but it's a useful one. And particularly when we're in the middle of a crisis, it sometimes is important to begin by reflecting on what's changed and how the landscape we're working with in is different. And just to name that and articulate it helps. And then we'll go on and talk about strengths and opportunities that we have that might help us provide tools to get through it. So it's a framework for a conversation, and that's really all it is. But we wanted to begin by going into 3 groups and spending about 10 minutes to simply name what we've lost because of this pandemic. And Mike, you will have nothing to say because we know there is no pandemic in New Zealand anymore. And boy, are we ever jealous. But for the rest of us, this is a reality that none of us have lived through. I keep saying I think this is as deep a crisis for our generation as the Second World War was for my parents or grandparents' generation. It has changed our economy that drastically. It's changed our sense of what it means to be community. It's changed the work that we do in continuing education and in the institutions we work for. It's changed how our churches are needing to be church. And it's changing our world. So we'd like to begin simply by naming that and articulating it. It's not where we're going to end up, but before we can get into what to do next, it's important to name that. And we're going to put you into small groups and invite you to talk about one of those, not all 3. So if you could please move your mouse over top of the pictures, you'll see all of the Zoom icons come up at the bottom of your screen. Click the one that says participants. Is everyone finding that? If you're seeing it, then down at the bottom of the participant screen, you will see either a red check mark or a green check mark or a red X, pardon me. If you'd like to be in a group that talks about continuing education programming and our institutions, click the green check mark. If you'd like to be in a group that is going to talk about the changes we're seeing in the churches that we serve or that the leaders we teach serve, click the red X. And if you want to talk about the changes that are happening in the world right now, don't click anything. And I will fairly quickly try to put us into small groups based on what you choose.
And of course, we're all looking at this through our lens as continuing educators, theological educators, and bringing that lens to these individual subsets. And I think we'll discover some things that we may not have individually thought about as we go into our groups.
Okay. And if you can use your best judgment and try to balance the groups so that we have people talking about each subject, that would be really helpful. Looks like right now Rick Rouse is the only one who wants to talk about the world, which is great. And Rick, you know, I could have a really good conversation about that because that's the one I'm going to talk about too. But it probably would be good and more helpful to our notes in the long run if we can balance the groups a little more. Of course, I'm halfway through this now and you're going to switch it all on me, right? Okay, I think I've got all of the green X's. There's 8 of you. And Joshua's a red X, and Chris, and Ursel. And who am I missing?
Are you going to mention the Google Doc before we break out, or is that our job when we break out?
I think I'll do that in just a second. Okay, so I think I have you in the groups. The other thing I'm going to give you is we're going to take notes on a Google Doc, and I'm putting links to that in the chat there. I've just added them again for the people who were on very early. You will have seen them once. So somebody in your group needs to take notes on the Google Doc, and then we'll collect all of the notes together. You will have screen sharing permission once you go into the small groups. And what I suggest is that the one person who's the scribe keep notes on the Google Doc and then share your screen with everybody else in your small group. Is that clear as mud?
Got it.
And you will find that once you get into small groups, the chat is still available to you, so you will still have those links. If you need help because something goes south, there's a button in the bottom right corner of your screen that will send me a panic message. And otherwise, I'm going to have us come back in 10 minutes. There, you'll find that there's a countdown timer in the top right corner if you're in one of the breakouts. If you stay in the main room with me, then there isn't. The questions are also in the document, so you should be able to find them there if you need them. You won't need to watch the PowerPoint that I've put up. Yes, thank you, Josh. Group World is doing group 3. They're staying here in the main room with me. Churches.
Yeah, I accidentally said that just to you and not to anybody else. Here, there we go.
Any other questions? Oh, that's scary. It must be more articulate than usual. Let's give this a try. Okay. And let me stop sharing this. And I will instead share this one. There. So there's our Google Doc. And we have Helen and Rick and Marion and Diane, was it? I'm sorry.
Deborah.
Deborah. Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah, I realized I logged in differently, so my whole name isn't showing up.
That's okay. I could change that if you want. It'll help me remember, if you don't mind my doing that.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
There we go. DEBRA or DA?
Yes, DEBRA.
Okay. Great.
Thanks.
So, how do you want to start this? I've got the thing open on my screen, so unless you want to, I mean, you're welcome to open it, or we can just have some conversation. I'll take some notes as we talk.
I'm on an iPad, so it's not so easy to take notes. So I will defer to anybody who's more prepared to that.
No problem. I don't mind writing. So, what changes are you noticing in our world?
This is Rick. Is this any better in terms of hearing me?
Now it is.
All of a sudden it came in, Rick. What did you do?
Well, I changed my setting.
Okay.
And thanks, Stephen, for showing me where to find that. Anyway, I think obviously one of the main changes is that the lack of community, that people are not able to be together face to face, and that's in a myriad ways, whether it's a forum where you can exchange ideas face to face, whether it's being able to visit someone in the nursing home or the hospital, whether it's the ability to worship or have fellowship together. I think there's a real hunger right now among people for that face to face, and for the tactile, for the touching, and the we're social beings, and I think that's right now one of the main changes and challenges.
And we're kind of realizing how important that was and how much we took it for granted, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
One of the things that seems different for me with this particular crisis that we're going through is not only are the familiar structures being taken away from us, not only are we experiencing devastating loss and suffering, but one of the other things that's been dismantled is all of the tools that we've always had as communities, whether they are civic or religious communities or cultural communities to deal with things. You know, usually when crap happens, it's a hard thing to go through, but the wisdom of the ancestors tells us that these are the best practices to use when going through that kind of thing. This is how we organize ourselves. We can't do any of that right now. And so a lot of folks are left feeling even more disempowered and hopeless and helpless than I've ever seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on those two comments in a couple different ways. Really, what you're saying, Helen, it's a way that it's like we're made passive kind of by having to remain in our homes and, you know, not be going out. And so it's like you feel it in a way of a disempowerment. And I think the disembodiment, you know, the sense of, in terms of what Rick was saying, that there's a way in which, you know, just shared meals, all the you know, for us, the sacramental signs, the symbols, you know, and the way that the body of the community really expresses God's presence with us. Like all of those things are just lacking in our sense of where is the sacred now, you know, in all of this. So that's a start, nothing new, just a different twist, I think, on what you had both had said.
I think at a global level, we're discovering in a way that's impossible to ignore the deep rifts in our social and economic fabric that had been growing over the last couple of decades. COVID may not discriminate as a virus, but the predisposition to getting the virus has a lot to do with the kind of work you do, the kind of rights you have, your access to health care. The rift between the haves and the have-nots has been split wide open in ways that I don't think any person of faith can ignore at this point, or any person of goodwill for that matter.
Yeah, I would just add to that sentiment that I think that we've been able to go along for a long time without noticing things, because things have seemed to be all right, at least on the surface. But now it's the exposure of the underbelly side of what we thought was normal and fine, because that's just the way things were. We're really having to take a deeper look and examine values, examine, you know, just wonder about the way things should be, and the way that we should or can do things to change things in a way that's equitable.
One of the things I talked about in last Sunday's sermon was about how we are discovering new ways of describing who is essential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who would have guessed that grocery store clerks and night cleaners would be more essential than people who live in corner offices?
I mean, I would say too, just from the experience more in Chicago and knowing kind of our experiences, you know, there's just, for people already, there was maybe a sense of a lack of, and I just want to say like safety, but also in the sense of the idea of the precarity of life around health and finances. And yes, like what's going to happen now if we've got nurses who have their masks on and they're being like assaulted, you know, or like where is that in terms of just even the polarization in our country and all the precarity around these conflicting and different values that are like clashing? That's kind of one of the ways I try to look at it. and how they're sort of like competing. Yeah. But safety, it's about safety and precarity, I think.
Yeah, and safety in a more holistic sense than just whether or not you're going to get the virus, but how much of a safety net you have. What is the degree of resiliency you and your family have? I'm aware, Stephen, that on this side of the 49th parallel, the very workers who are now being defined as essential are also the same people who've been fighting for a minimum wage of $15 an hour for a number of years,
Yes.
and often without success.
Yep.
Because the thought has been that these folks have a certain amount of expendability.
That's,
Yeah. So.
that's certainly been true in Canada too. We have 2 pandemics in Canada, maybe you do too. They talk about the community at large in the long-term care homes. And the people who work in long-term care homes are getting paid next to nothing, just a fraction above minimum wage. They don't want to come to work. They're terrified. They keep getting sick. We don't give them enough tools. Our breakout rooms are going to close in 10 seconds, so I think our conversation is over. Thank you. What an interesting conversation. We could take the whole hour just doing this.
Good. Good start.
Thank you.
It is a good start. Thank you.
Thank you.
The churches group is back.
Great. I think you're all back.
Great.
Yep.
So let me switch over to the first screen here. I'm going to put all of you over here. And those of you who were talking about continuing education in our institutions, let me just put your notes up here so we can see them. Do you want to highlight anything? I mean, we can probably read through them, but what are you noticing here? Who was in that group? How do you want to speak to this?
I appreciated the contributions from the group, and 2 things to highlight. One is the missing the ready access to the technical tools and support that we had when we were in one place. And then mentioning also the sidebar conversations that happen. We didn't have to plan for how those happened. And it's something that we need to, we have an opportunity to think about differently. And anybody else in my group want to say anything? All right.
Fascinating to say our programming is based on being in a building together. I mean, that is so true. I was talking to a colleague the other day who was remembering the exile, trying to figure out how do you sing the Lord's song in a strange land when you don't have a temple. This is the crisis we're in, right?
It's a really good application.
Yep.
Anything anybody in the other groups wants to add to this about the reality we're living in?
I want to say amen about the stress and anxiety of institutions about the value of continuing education.
Yep.
Con Ed is on the chopping block whenever there's a stress, right? We noticed that in 2008, at the moment we had an economic crisis, Con Ed programming was threatened in a way that credentialing programming wasn't.
Yep.
I'm at Vanderbilt. This is Sophia, and we're experiencing actually the reverse of that. We're sort of being given the freedom to develop something in this moment, knowing that that's one way to serve not just our alumni, but those in the region and beyond. And so we're excited to actually be building a lifelong learning continuing education program.
That's excellent.
Yep. welcome, Sophia.
Yeah.
Glad you're here.
And I guess I would echo that, Sophia. Your picture's over there, my camera's over here. Sorry about that. Let me do it this way. I have never done so many webinars in the whole time I've worked for the United Church of Canada. Oh my God, I'm getting tired. But all of a sudden, there's a real sense of excitement about the possibility of connecting in this new way. So it has had the opposite effect on my programming. I have a webinar every Wednesday night with church treasurers across the country, and we're getting almost 1,000 people. 1,000 people! Yeah. It just absolutely blows me away.
It's amazing.
I wonder what the impact of that is going to be when we finally get back in our buildings, and how people will finally start to connect in new ways.
Yeah.
Yep.
It does seem like continuing education has a moment here, or it could have a moment here where it really could be focused on more, because people or might be thinking about it more, have the ability, or there's all these options that are coming up. And so then when things get put on the chopping block at the institutions, the question is why? And is it purely out of, and this is an open question. I'm asking y'all who are in these situations. Is it purely out of a stereotype of the lack of profitability, or the feeling that this is superfluous, or what's your sense of why that's the case?
Yeah, so I agree. I think I would modify that point in terms of the perceived value of continuing education. So the dilemma is, even if the perception is that continuing education or lifelong learning is of high value, the stresses within the institution of, in cases like this, of having to make hard and difficult administrative choices that are often framed by, from the question about what's the primary mission in a degree granting program, for example. If you're not close to the center of gravity of degree granting activities, that can become a liability when administration needs to make a difficult choice.
Well, and that's part of what's exciting when you see how the ATS standards are changing. And we want to get into that as in future webinars. I think we're going to address that mostly in the July one. Is that right, folks?
Yes.
And try to look at how the standards are changing, because we may be coming closer to the mission than we have in a long time, and that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware of time. Anything else that we want to add to the group one topic before we go on and look at what group two said?
This is Rick. Just a comment that I think this is also opening up a tremendous opportunity for those that are in continuing education. We have continuing theological education. We have a huge opportunity in terms of reaching an audience that we never have before if we continue to do what you're doing, Stephen, in terms of making this available online. I suppose the challenge will be figuring out a business model that makes sense, but it opens the door in terms of reaching rostered leaders and non-rostered leaders in our church to a degree that we've never been able to before or thought of before.
No, I agree. And we're starting to wade into the second small group discussion, which is about strengths and opportunities. And isn't that cool that we want to go there? But I don't want to lose the chance to hear from the other two groups.
Right.
Diane, right, you were asking if my webinars are free. The ones about the pandemic are. Ordinarily, I charge about $15 for a webinar, for a regular 60 to 90-minute webinar. But during the pandemic, we made a strategic decision that this was then a ministry as a general council to our denomination. Yeah, that's been part of the uptick for sure. Let me bring up the second group. So these folks talked about the churches and what's changing for our churches.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just take a minute to read through it, and then maybe somebody from that group can highlight what happened here.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time talking about the worship experience and how that's changed. And again, you have a situation where you have an institution that is predicated on the notion of a physical building, that's kind of where things are set up and how it's all expected to be. And there's a couple of different models, the pre-recorded service versus the like a live Zoom. And we didn't really get into this a lot, but do you try to recreate what you were doing live? Or do you try to do something a little bit different? And, pre-recorded, you can kind of sort of mimic what you've done in a church setting. It doesn't have the intimacy of a live Zoom. It also, the pre-recorded has a little more slickness to it, and you can do more with technology. So it really just depends on the culture of your community and what people are wanting. We talked a lot about exhaustion. And I thought what a really good point was, we talked about Zoom fatigue, obviously, but one of the I thought this was an interesting point. I forgot who made it, but the idea that that whenever we're pulling all this technology together in order to make it easier for people, there's an adverse effect to that, in that it takes more time. And there's an inverse relationship between those two things. So the more you try to make things kind of easygoing and easy for, like, not overstressing, overburdening your staff or your pastors, the more technological knowledge your constituents have to have in order to make sense of it and to make work with it, versus if you do everything and get everything kind of set up and make it very easy for people to access and go through the extra time to help explain it to people and teach people how to use things, then obviously you're spending more time doing it, but that also makes it more accessible. So that's part of that relationship you have to negotiate. I don't know if anybody else had anything they wanted to bring up in the group.
We didn't necessarily talk about this, but I think one of the things that, to your point, that I keep emphasizing when I talk to folks about sort of the space and moment that we're in, is this is an opportunity for us to be creative and try something maybe that we didn't have the opportunity or were not forced to think about before. And so the advice of not trying to recreate whatever was the norm before, I think leaves us with both a challenge, but a really great opportunity to reimagine what worshiping communities look and feel like, how we gather, what are the essential components of that time together. And I hope that this is giving us an opportunity to really pause, so that when things go back to whatever the next thing is, that we've had an opportunity to kind of feel different things out and see what sticks and what could be a new path forward.
That's great.
Thank you. What about those folks who are looking at the world? And again, take a moment to read through it, and then maybe somebody from that group would like to summarize this or highlight what was important to you in it. Somebody from that group like to speak to us? Not me. I'm doing talking as it is.
Well, I can summarize a few things. It seems to me that there are a couple of main threads. One was the sense of loss of the real embodied connections, loss of the ability to reach out and see and touch people in real life. And somehow technology makes us, and our need to shelter in place makes us more passive. It feels like there's less that we can do. Those habits that we would have for reaching out and helping, we are told not to do. So it's a passive piece of that. I think another one was kind of an exposure of the underside of culture, the underside of, and the challenges in our culture, things that we've been able to overlook. But now we're seeing, you know, essential workers that we thought were expendable are now very important. And things are being turned upside down. And it's shifting our perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Anything anybody wants to add? Anything that we missed or something we overlooked?
Well, this is Rick. Yeah, Stephen, I think the one of the other main issues that we talked about was the fact that the lack of equality, justice issues, I think that's all coming to the forefront. I mean, those of us that have been, you know, in continuing education and seminary work know these things, but I think it's exposing the underbelly, exposing the inequality in ways that we can no longer ignore as a society. And I think this is maybe also calling the church to say, you know, we need to even more strongly lift up the need for equality and justice. And this is an opportunity for us to use this exposure to share the gospel in new ways, and hopefully wake people up to the need for justice in our culture.
Okay. Well, thank you. Go ahead.
I would add, in our area, and probably in other scenarios too, we're seeing a lot of new homeless or new homeless being living. And the whole infrastructure for caring for people without shelter it's becoming a thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing it'll grow probably by 30 to 40% by the end of summer.
Yes.
That's a lot of homeless people. And because parks and a variety of other places are closed, we're trying to figure out where to help them feel like they can go.
Yeah.
And as a herd.
Thank you. I am aware that it's 15 minutes to the hour, and we're only partway through our agenda, and that's okay. This has been a great conversation. I'd like to switch gears, and I'd like to take about 10 minutes to look at the next question in our small groups. And then with your permission, if you have a little longer than going past the top of the hour, it would be great to just finish out a plenary discussion on the next question. But if you have to leave early, that's okay. We'll save the recording, we'll save the notes, we'll share them with everybody. But it's already clear that we're starting to talk about opportunities and things that we can bring to the situation we're dealing with. And that's because we're continuing educators. we want to make the work relevant, and we want to make the church relevant, and that really is at the core of what we do. Mm-hmm. And so we'd like to go back into the same group so we don't have to build new relationships, and take some time just to talk a little bit more explicitly about that before we go into separate directions. Mm-hmm. And it may be that we'll save the third question for June when we get back together again. But let's have group one talk about tools and resources that are already in our toolkit. We just may not be using them or haven't been using them in the same way. Mm-hmm. So what have we got in our toolkit already that we could use? Group two, the one that talked about the church, if you could talk about what topics and skills do our audience need? Our audience, I presume, being clergy or church leaders. What do they require as they're trying to navigate their way through this new reality that we've named? And then the third one is about how do we teach this? What kinds of teaching methodology do we need? What kinds of tools? How should our teaching strategies be different? So if we can, again, take 10 minutes in small groups and then come back and just debrief the small groups a little bit, we'll have lots to talk about. Any questions about that?
And we know that there are a couple folks who may have to leave before we wrap up, and we will miss you, and we hope to see you in June.
Sure. And I would say to the groups, please continue to use the same Google Doc. The second question is on the same doc, and then I can bring it up for us all just like we did. Okay, here we go. Okay. Oh, gee, we got the easy one.
Stephen, can I start by just asking a question?
Yes.
You have had a lot of experience, obviously, doing webinars. So, you know, somebody like you can be a guru for us. Teaching methodology, we're at PLTS, we're using now a lot of distance learning. In fact, all of our students currently are on distance learning. We just launched a pretty robust distance learning methodology this last fall. And fortunately, we're able now to, with students sequestered and so on, we're able to continue to offer courses and so on. But the I want to take it another step further. You know, I'm working with a congregation, for example. We've been doing some strategic planning and visioning, and we're going to be doing a leadership retreat online. Now, I just did my first Zoom course for pastors for leadership. So, I mean, I got the skill down about how to put a PowerPoint on and use that effectively. But what I don't know is what you're doing now, having people go into small groups for conversation. You know, so that kind of methodology, I think we're going to need to do more and more of that, and into the, who knows, into the near future, the long term. You know, we don't know what this is going to look like. But in terms of methodology, I think, how can we more effectively do online work? I guess that's the question I'm posing.
I think it's fair to say that we designed today's workshop as a way to showcase some of the methodologies that are possible in Zoom. So, so there was a bit of a not quite hidden agenda in that, but now is not the time to teach how to do it, but maybe to show what's possible.
So, but that's my question then, is where do we go? How do we learn the skills that we need to be able to do this?
You know, if you're working in Zoom, the Zoom help support site is excellent.
Okay.
The way I learned it was by finding out what was possible and then going and figuring out how to do it once I knew what was possible. And the idea of pairing Zoom and the Google Docs so that every group can make their own notes and we can collect them together. I picked up that by watching somebody else do it too. So we learn from each other and then we plagiarize.
And I might add
this
some
has
practice.
been very helpful. Thanks, sir.
I would add finding some people just to practice with, and do some trial runs. Really helps in making helping you feel confident with the technology.
When I first started doing this, I would set up an online meeting between my desktop and my laptop. I could make all my mistakes with nobody watching.
I've just come from running a conference. It's a multi-day conference this week, and we hired, which isn't always possible, a group that helped us set everything up and is running all of the tech part in the background in case people have technical issues. So I can MC the program. They set up our Zoom settings in a certain way, and they created a technical specification guide with all the blocks of time and talked with us about how do you do handoffs? What does hospitality look like? Some of these little things that help it go more smoothly. And now that we've done this once with them, we can train our own staff on how to do some of this. The hospitality piece, I think, is actually really critically important in moving to this new platform. And hello, everyone. I just popped in because I was at another conference. It's good to see you all.
Thank you, Erica. That's cool.
I would say, so I've had a longer experience of teaching online. In a previous role, I was teaching for 4 years online, and before that at college and universities that had sort of the course platform type things that you use to post materials and whatnot. And one of the things, the Thriving in Ministry, the grant that we have in support of ministers, I've been using a course platform, but and providing some content. We sort of have monthly themes to support Thriving in Ministry. So there's some content and YouTube videos and discussion happening there. But the other piece for me is we have a companioning module that we use. So we use Zoom for small group spiritual companioning monthly. So there's, say, like a cohort of 20 in this 10-month program, and we have 4 or 5 small groups with facilitators. And that's the place where they take, you know, the content and maybe consider it in light of where they are. But it's different, you know, it really, for me, there has to be some sort of element of more personal accompaniment. So you know, I'll be teaching online this summer, and I will, like with most of my students online, I'll at least have a 10 or 15-minute Zoom call with them, so I can see them face to face, so I can learn what their ministerial goals are, and really, you know, have a handle on where they are, what is their life situation, and really teach them. So I think it's also like finding different ways of connecting with the technology that we have, and then still providing the content. So.
Yeah. And I want to pick up on that because I've been working with several faculty members on this conference from different institutions. And I also watched a Wabash webinar that was really geared toward faculty moving online to teach MDiv students. But I'm hearing a lot of them say, of course, we can't teach the same way, that really maybe a max of 15 minutes and small groups, and that we can't just translate the amount of content we would have normally done in person to online. And so a lot of them are moving to more interactive kinds of like just short bits of information. And I think that's a big transition for a lot of folks who are used to lecturing, and maybe a good one, because I'm not sure that long lecture really works well with our brains, but they're being forced to do that now. And I think that's important for us as continuing educators to be mindful of when we're designing in this other space.
Yeah, the method that I've been following would say even shorter than 15 minutes. You want some kind of interactive activity every 3 or 4 minutes.
Wow.
Even if it's just a question, are you, or what do you think about? But she would, you know, she would teach for a while, and then she would throw out a question. What do you think? You know, click yes or no. Let's have a quick poll. She's constantly inviting people to think about what they're hearing. So that it's much more active learning, a lot less passive learning.
Yeah, I think I would just say those are sort of trends in education overall, maybe concerns about people's attention spans, or so now, for example, when I am creating a lot more videos, you know, in the sense of like even for this program, or I did a workshop on professional standards for ministry, and just, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm thinking the longest I would do is I try to stay under 30 minutes if it's for a course, like something that's like more, I don't know, required, or they're getting CE units from it. In terms of the methodology, it can be hard to get the back and forth. The other challenge, so one of the things that you might notice today, right, is that, because when I've done this in the past, what I actually did was I made one Google Doc link. And so then, because I was the instructor and I had like 3 different groups going on, I couldn't be in all of them, and I didn't have assistants, you know, or other people who could be in. Then I could at least see the Google Doc. And I could see like, okay, the group 1's here, group 2, group 3, and then track them. And I could, you know, at least I could see people were making comments and discussing. So that was one trick to maybe overcome just this little piece in terms of the method with like the different documents. If you're the only person leading it, you might not have that extra support. Yeah.
Well, and as you saw, I've got all 3 Google Docs open on different tabs, so I can tab back and forth.
Yeah, you're going back and forth, yeah.
So, yeah.
Something that excites me, I think, about us all being pushed in this direction. Some of us were already there, but a lot of us had to be kind of dragged in this direction, is the reach that we can have. I mean, for Austin Seminary, a lot of our programs were face-to-face, like, you know, 85, 90% of them, and we would draw a lot of the same people in our area. But we've always been kind of called upon to what can we do to support pastors in rural areas? Because Texas is huge.
I can interrupt you because everybody else has joined us again, Erica.
Hello, everyone.
Erica.
Hi, it's good to see you all.
And once again, we don't have enough time to do everything we want to do, but that's okay, because a large part of what the value of this has been the conversations. It's almost the top of the hour, and I know that some of you have other appointments, and I appreciate that. Before you all leave, let me just jump back to the PowerPoint. so that I can bring up the dates of our next meetings, because some of you may want to leave before we've had a chance to just sort of collect all our thoughts on this. Our intention is to carry on the conversation in another month. Pardon me, on the 2nd of June. We're just building this adaptive approaches for continuing education part 2, because we didn't think we'd get finished today, and indeed we haven't, and that's okay. So plan to join us again. We moved to this time of day so that Mike Crudge didn't have to get up too brutally early in the morning. And Mike, it's wonderful to have you back with us, so thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for making the time.
Yeah, and then we're going to gather again on the 7th of July and look at the new ATS standards. And Sarah, maybe you could say a word or two about Frank Yamada and what we're hoping to do in that program.
Well, or if Helen's still here, she can chime in. But by that time, I believe the ATS will have had their first ever biennial online meeting and accomplished whatever agendas they are set to accomplish online. So it may be up in the air whether they'll get to all of the new standards, but one of the proposed new standards is a reframing of standards for continuing education and how we might respond. So whatever business takes place at the biennial meeting and whatever the condition of the world is at that time, I think we will glean much from Frank that will continue to fuel our discussions for these first Tuesdays over the summer. Both how we do things now and how we may continue doing things as we continue to learn, because we're not going to stop learning through this thing.
No, I think we've just begun. Thank you. So for those of you who don't have to leave, let's go back and just kind of debrief what came up in each of these groups. But for those of you who do, we're glad you could be with us, and thanks for joining us, and join us again next time. So there's group 1's page. Is there anybody for 1 who would like to flesh this out for us?
Can you scroll down some more, Stephen, to show that?
Sorry. That's about it.
Okay.
Let me make it. I think everything's on the screen there.
Yeah. There was a fair amount of energy around the sort of the middle section of collaboration, showcasing, looking at some of what Israel pointed out as the counterintuitive things that people, even though something's online, people still look at things like, we heard Erica talking about that they may look to their regional resource or denominational resource first. And there may be ways that we can resource one another by sharing programs in a box.
What do you mean by a program in a box?
Well, Dale Rounds mentioned that, got to change that. Or Melissa maybe brought that. We had talked about, you know, if we have content, or Israel brought up, if we have content ministering to a dying congregation already planned out, all you need is a leader. Sharing that, you know, that another institution or programmer could offer that same thing using a leader of their selection who had relationships with some of their basic constituency, that kind of thing. So not recreating our own curricular type wheels.
That's fair. Anything else anybody wants to add there?
I'll just add just briefly, Sarah, to what you said. That's one way we're thinking about launching our lifelong learning is what content do we already have readily available, so it's not going to take as big of an effort to get going. You know, we have workshops that we offer. What connections in the community do we already have? What things have our faculty already led, so that there's some minor tweaking and some content creation still, but not in the same way as you're creating something, you know, brand new from scratch.
Yep.
Mm.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. Let's look quickly at the second group. Oops, sorry, that's the wrong, there we go. That was your group, Josh, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot of good notes here, I thought. You guys can read most of it there, I think, but I think a lot of it was kind of focusing on how to help with the anxiety that comes out of these different phases of the pandemic crisis that we're in. We were initially in a stage of, all right, what do we do now? And you kind of scramble and you solve the problem. And then you kind of, okay, this is what we're doing now. And now there's a new anxiety of, all right, now when do we get back to normal? And how do you manage that? And so I think working with anxiety of the congregations, and as a result, the anxiety of clergy is they are trying to process what their communities are going through, and they're trying to be supportive. And again, that question of energy, you're going all these different directions. You're not able to utilize the same kind of pastoral resources that you're used to. So the idea is, how can congregations and clergy be helping each other kind of through this together? And maybe it's not so much one person that's kind of managing everything, or one person that kind of all falls on. Maybe there's other things that we could be doing to support each other, but that's a lot. That's a lot to ask. And so I think that was something that is worth exploring, just from a practical level. Finding new ways to do these things, ways to work in this setting. Church work is attractional was one of the things that Sophia was taught. I think it was Sophia, I can't remember who it was. Or it was, yeah. But we need to be more missional. Like, we've been saying that for decades now, but this is a now new thing. Like, now in this reality, what that means to be missional, it really kind of forces your hand to look at it in a different way. So these are all different topics. Some of these were that's kind of how I wrote these down as just kind of general topics that could be discussed, as far that might help us adapt, that might help us think how to adjust to this new reality.
Okay. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Anybody want to add anything to that?
Oh, I did want to highlight the new rituals and the new rituals that people have been creating as a result of this. Stephen, we talked a little bit about lighting the candles as a thing that you've been doing. Amy, my partner's been doing the same thing in her services. And she's also, I think it was one of the people in our group, they've been doing regular devotionals and they've created new prayer rhythms as a result of, now that you have this access to people's homes, and kind of, you can create more times to pray, more times to be together. And Amy, she's been doing morning and evening prayers ever since ever since the lockdown started. She's been doing morning and evening prayers every night. And so that's been a huge, even when only a couple people show up, I think it's a huge, people know what's happening even if they don't attend.
And I think that there could be some rich resources, both from intercultural and multicultural rituals springing up from different communities.
Yeah.
And those are dynamic things, not just artifacts, but they are artifacts that I think are valuable to capture and share right now, or as we go forward, because it's, again, not right now, it's going to take a while.
Yes. Mindful of time, and thank you for this. So here's the comments from the third group, and we were talking about teaching methodology and teaching strategies. Rick, Erica, you were in that group. Do you want to say a word or two about that?
Rick has bowed out, I believe.
I'm still here.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought you said goodbye.
Rick, please take over. I'm having an afternoon snack.
That's allowed.
You have to tell us what it is.
hospitality there, Erica. You know.
Well, if you really want to know, it's no-bake cookies that didn't actually make it into cookie form, and so it's basically just a bowl of no-bake cookie dough.
Minus the salmonella, the best snack
Excellent.
ever.
This is part of being inviting into other people into our homes.
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is Rick still here?
I'm still here, yep.
Okay, Rick, would love for you to share.
No, go ahead, Erica.
Oh, well, we were talking a lot about how to learn from each other, especially, I mean, we kind of focused on this new tool that we're using, the virtual conference or digital technology, and how we can learn the different ways of doing that by watching each other, whether it's small group breakouts or sharing Google Docs. And we started talking about, different ways you have to approach things online, shorter chunks of material, more interactive methods. And I think it was Stephen who mentioned, someone he's following said, every 3 minutes you need to do something interactive, which surprised me but that was great to hear that. And then we were gonna continue on into, other opportunities with that, but really kind of focusing on active learning strategies and how we can learn this all together.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And in light of one of the sort of things we're mourning and or opportunities that some, inherent in the design and the methodologies is how to create community when we're not always all virtually in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
And prayer groups, discussion groups, those kinds of things, with intention, do work.
Mm-hmm.
But, we're not practiced at it. There is.
No. It really is about how do we take what we already know how to do and use it in totally different ways. We were acknowledging a lot of these active learning strategies that we were talking about are already being explored in face-to-face settings. It's been a long time since anybody recommended that a lecture was the best way to teach. We still do it, but it's been a long time since anybody thought that was really good pedagogy. We're just realizing it's even worse in this medium than it is face-to-face.
Well, and I might even bookmark that in academia, that still may be prevailing. In lifelong learning, we have diverged from that longer. And congregations, I think, are a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that is one of the strengths of the people in Ullum that we can offer to the rest of the church, is that we have been exploring these new ways of teaching for a lot longer.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yep.
It is 12 minutes past the hour, and we are down to 6 people. And so I think we need to draw at least the recording to a close. And if there are folks who are watching the recording, thank you. Thanks for hanging in there. You had a chance to watch the facilitated groups, and you had a chance to watch the third group do their own thing too, because I never turned off the recording. So there's a recording that I think it will be interesting to folks who couldn't be with us. And there's lots to chew on for our next meeting too.